Good morning. You know, it's an honor to be back. I recognize many of the faces, and I always am struck whenever I'm asked to come back to an organization and talk. And I always think one of two things. I think, A, things must have gone really, really well, and they want to know what I've been thinking of lately. Or B, y'all just have terrible memories. So I'm banking on the former, not the latter. So let's get started. A couple weeks ago, I was flying back from Dallas-Fort Worth to Chicago. And for those of you that have taken this flight, you'll know that it's quite the commuter flight. There are a lot of frequent flyers on this, a lot of business suits on this trip back to Chicago. And I was waiting there. It was late in the day. I had a terrible seat in the back of the aircraft. I was on the standby list. Now, I wasn't on the standby list for business class, but I was on the standby list for the next best place, which is what on the airplane? The exit row. Where are my fellow exit row passengers? There's got to be. Here they are. They always know themselves. Now, the exit row is an interesting place, isn't it? You know, as with most other things in life, whenever added responsibility is given to us, our anxiety levels tend to increase, with the exception of the exit row. If we get this seat on the aircraft that has the word emergency written over it, for some reason, that 5 extra inches of legroom, our anxiety levels drop, don't they? So luckily, I was upgraded to the exit row, lucky me. And there I sat in the exit row. Now, for those of you that have sat in the exit row, you'll appreciate that. And for those of you that haven't, I'll teach you something new here. So when you're sitting in the exit row, here's what happens. Flight attendant comes by. She looks at each person in the exit row and says, "Are you aware that you are sitting in an exit row?" And we all certainly know we're sitting in the exit row because we've been waiting for hours to get in the exit row. So no one disagrees with this. No one doesn't know this. She then looks at us and says, "Are you able and willing to assist the crew in the event of an emergency?" And we all say, certainly, with a little apprehension at first. And she has us repeat it, doesn't she? Then, with more confidence, yes, we're able and willing to help the crew in the event of an emergency. And then she does one last thing. Before she leaves, she asks us each to reach into the seat back pocket in front of us and to read the safety instruction card, which looks something like this if you're familiar with it. Now, most often, none of us look at this, do we? We sort of head fake in that direction. She walks by. Now, here's what occurs. After the flight attendant walks by, nervous laughter ensues among those people in the exit row, typically. We're getting to know each other, and what typically happens at this point in the process is that the people that came on to the aircraft originally as individuals are all of a sudden a team. We're the only team on the aircraft. The person in 2B and 26E will probably never meet each other, but we now are a team. So I'm sitting there at Dallas-Fort Worth waiting to take off. Anxiety levels are down. And I was actually thinking of you, believe it or not, and thinking of the slogan of today's meeting. And I thought, you know, together we're making a difference, me and my fellow exit row passengers sitting here, the team that we have on this aircraft. We can do something different. But now with this information in hand, I thought, you know, I better read the safety instruction card. So I had my new responsibility. I leaned forward. I pulled the card out of the pocket. And let me share this with you. This is the very first sentence on the safety instruction card. I want you to think about what this says and what they're trying to do here. It says the following. It says, if you are sitting in an exit row, okay, that's me, please identify yourself to a crew member to allow for reseating if, you ready for this? You lack the ability to read. Now, need I point out the irony in this statement? Needless to say, my anxiety level just went right back up to where it was before I got on the aircraft. So this struck me. I thought, how many times in life do we assume that everyone understands what they're supposed to do? And that together, yeah, me and my exit row passengers can make a difference, assuming that we understand the difference we're trying to make. Fault number one. Fault number two is then when communicating that, we assume that the traditional and conventional ways of communicating will work with pretty much everyone. Now, in order to bring my anxiety level back down again, I looked to my right. There's a gentleman who was working on his laptop, so I figured, okay, he knows how to read. And then I looked back the other way and flipping through a magazine. She knows how to read, so we were pretty safe. So there we sat, together, making a difference. So I began then to think about leadership. You know, this notion of leadership that we are endlessly fascinated with, aren't we, leadership? We have leadership committees. We have leadership training. We have leadership awards. But when's the last time you ever heard anyone talking about followership? I mean, have you ever heard anyone say, you know, John, I understand there's a spot for him on the followership team? Or, I understand at the company picnic this year that they're going to give Susan a followership award. It just doesn't happen, does it? But you see, leadership is only leadership in the presence of followership. We have a leader, we have a follower, and we have some context. And we have to have all three of those in order to have leadership. But we don't need more than one follower, and that follower can be yourself. And that's what I'm here to talk about today, is how do you lead yourself to make a difference among a group, particularly in the positions that you're in. So what do leaders want? Well, Xavier shared this with you. All leaders around this world want the same thing, as do you. You want people around you who can execute. You want people around you who can be change agents. You want people around you that can innovate and collaborate, communicate, manage complexity. We all want the same things. And the last time that I was here, I spent a great deal of time on these. But there's a bigger question here. And what I've been wrestling with over the past couple of years is, what's the cause behind this? And then my mind started to wander, and I started to investigate this topic a little further. And I realized that all of these things were essentially effects, outcomes, if you will, not necessarily the cause. And what we have to do is we have to create a cause to affect these outcomes, which is an entirely different list of things that we need to do. There are things such as share the vision in order to execute. If you want to be a change agent, you first must believe in the direction, or why would we want to change? In order to innovate and collaborate, we have to first know our core strengths. In order to communicate effectively, we have to overcome some personal fear. And then finally, in order to manage complexity, we have to learn never to give up, and we have to learn about will. So fundamentally, what we have to do is to learn how to lead the self to affect the group as a whole. Now, behaviorists will tell you that there are two ways that we are motivated as individuals: externally and internally. No surprise, those things that are externally determined for us tend to lead to a sense of lack of control when we're told what to do, versus those where we decide for ourselves, we work from a place of enjoyment. Now, perhaps no one in the world understood this better than Michael Jordan, who arguably was one of the greatest players ever to play the game. Jordan understood intrinsic motivation. In fact, he understood the value of it so much so that he had it literally written into his contract. In his contract in the NBA, it's the only clause called the love of the game clause. And Jordan understood that it was his love of the game that mattered most, and that's why he would get up every night and play, not just for the fans, not just for the coaches, not just for the world, but for himself. And what that love of the game clause said, essentially, was that at any point in time, anywhere in the world, if he cared to do so, he could pick up a street game with kids down the street on the block if he wanted to do so, because he understood that that's what was going to allow him to lead. That's what was different. It wasn't Phil Jackson, it wasn't the team, it wasn't the fans, it wasn't the world, but it was his own decision that he could motivate himself. So this is the essence of where I want to focus. Michael Jordan, in addition to Michael Jordan, there are other people that are intrinsically motivated. Children. Now, how many of you have kids? You can relate with this, most of you. Kids are very intrinsically motivated, almost to a fault. They tend to be almost entirely self-indulgent. At least my son is. So I ran across this study, and I thought this was really interesting. It showed that adults do this 5 to 7 times a day, and children do this 80 to 100 times a day. Now, I immediately began to count the number of diapers that our little 18-month-old goes through, but then that didn't reconcile with the adult side of the equation, the 5 to 7 times. It didn't quite make sense to me, so I realized that that couldn't quite be it. But what I did learn was this.
Children smile and laugh a lot.
Children smile and laugh a lot, up to 80 to 100 times a day. Now, what in the world happens between the time that we're children and the time that we're adults to take that laughter from 80 to 100 to 5 to 7? The other thing that children stop doing after they're age 3 is they stop asking why. So it isn't any wonder that when Xavier was saying earlier that you have to say why, not just what. We're trained to stop asking this question. And why do you think that is? Well, what happens is, after a while, kids become an annoyance to their parents. And we turn away and the sky's blue because. So kids are trained almost to stop asking the question why. And over time, we as adults sort of fall prey to this same notion. So leadership exists between the crosshairs of two things, primarily. One is our ability to control the outcomes of a situation. And two is our perception of what the vision is that we're trying to achieve. So in those situations where we feel we have absolutely no control over the outcomes, and we don't, to be honest, really know what the outcomes are, we operate in a place of desperation. In those situations where it's really clear what the goal is, but we have absolutely no perception of any control over that outcome, we operate from a place of frustration. So this is me and my fellow exit row passengers on the aircraft. We know exactly what we want the plane to do, don't we? We want it to land. We have no control over it, so we're frustrated. The third place where we spend some time is where we have control over the outcomes, or we feel that we have control over the outcomes, but we're not really sure exactly what the goal is. And this is when we're just generally confident people with no goal in mind. So as Xavier said earlier, you need a goal, and you need the drive and the outcomes to get there. And then finally, there are those times in our lives where the goal is clear and where we feel we can affect the outcome, and this is a place of hope. Hope not in a blindly optimistic sense, but hope in a willful sense, that we can change things. And self-leaders, great self-leaders, operate in this place of hope and can move in that direction. So fundamentally, it's about leading the selves. How do we maintain the creativity that you have as researchers while building the group's performance? Now, why is self important? Well, if you look back over the history of mankind, change has typically been the result of some extreme act of solitude. Greatness seems to favor the individual performer, whether it's Picasso in his studio, Rachel Carson among the trees, Einstein in his lab, or Martin Luther King on his march. However, sustainable success favors the team. The Beatles, Blue Man Group, Crick and Watson, the U.S. military. So we must learn then to act together. It's about leading the self and acting together. So fundamentally what I want to talk about is how do you cause the effect? How do you get inside, inspire yourself, and cause an effect? So first of all, we have to switch the math, if you will. We have to turn the algorithm backwards. Put the cause before the effect. Talk about the self. Share the vision. Believe in direction. Know your core strengths. Overcome fear. And fundamentally, never give up. So let's start with share the vision. I want you to imagine for a moment that you live in London. The year's 1914. It's winter. The world is at war. You flip open a local newspaper and you read the following ad. The ad reads as follows. Men wanted for hazardous journey. Small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. Ernest Shackleton. Now, how many of you sign up for this job? Interesting. So the goal is clear. In 1914, December 1st, Sir Ernest Shackleton was looking for 27 men to join him on the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. The first time any man would go south and attempt to cross this frozen tundra of Antarctica. The goal was clear. Walk on foot across this continent and take the boat back. As those of you familiar with the story, what occurred? Not exactly what was planned. 6 months into their trip, the boat is locked within the ice floes of the Antarctic Sea. Shackleton orders an abandoned ship, and all of a sudden everyone is digging out the ship. Now, all of you that have dug out your car this summer, imagine you're standing on ice, which is surely to melt, incidentally, within a matter of months as soon as the thaw comes. And you're 800 miles from any other humanity. Now, look around your table for a moment and ask yourself, if I were sitting with these people on this ship 800 miles from humanity, what would they do? Sir, you can't change tables back there, by the way. See, he's trying to sneak around the side. But what would you do? Well, here's what Shackleton does. He realizes that, look, the current objective is impossible. For us to cross this and survive is impossible to do. So he changes the vision. He changes the direction. Looks at all of his men and he says, now we will go home. With 100% confidence and will, looks at them. Now imagine these 27 men, 800 miles, standing on frozen water that's going to melt under their feet, and your boss looks at you and says, we're walking. So in fact, they do. They start walking. Now what on earth could they have been thinking? The leader's crazy. He must be nuts. Did he lose his compass? He doesn't know how far we are. They start walking home. 22 months from the day that they left, they arrived in England. All 28 men survived. 2 years they lived on